How's it going, everybody? Bit of a different topic for today. Still haven't really had a chance to sit down and kind of get those budget brews going, but we had a lot of new news today. We had a new card of the week, but that really wasn't the thing that kind of took off in like the FFTCG sphere. It was the fact that the pre-release promo for the next set got spoiled, which is Lunafreya. And if you haven't read Lunafreya, I'll just kind of go over the list of comments over here if you want like the rapid opinions. The real card of the week. Sigh. Genuinely can't believe they're printing this. Uh, yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, the card looks completely absurd and over the top. But rather than talk about Luna Freya in full here, and maybe I'll talk about her more kind of at the end, I figured it was a good chance to kind of go back and one set in. Let's do a quick, vibe check how we're all feeling on limit breaks. And I'll be honest, I think the mechanic plays and came out a lot better than I thought it was going to. Particularly for a first wave of support, I think most of the cards are good and have a reason to exist. I would say that like of the quote unquote misses, there's not very many of them. Like going here from the top, Zach is pretty much exactly what he was described in the 10. I don't really think he was the first card, limit break card they showed, and I think that like we clocked him pretty well. But I think that he's still very good. I think a 7K that can round up your pings and kind of sit there as a body is a card worth playing. Montleonis was I was falling off a lot lately. I really haven't seen a lot of Mono Fire and tourneys, but the moment Mono Fire does come back, Montleonis is going to be the reason why, or one of the best cards in that deck. But it's so archetype locked that it is going to be pretty easy to do. I think Victoria and Surges are both extremely powerful. Almost funnily enough, the limit breaks that are have the hero rares are almost better than the ones that are rare legends. Because like if you're in fire and you're not on mono fire, you really only get Zac from splashing fire. But if you splash ice, you get access to both Victoria and Surges. And if you splash lightning, you get Cloud and Lightning. So same for like Earth. If you splash Earth, you get Shantoto and Mott. But I think both of these came out generally pretty decently. I thought Victoria was going to be a lot more powerful than she ended up being, and the card is still very good. Sees a lot of play, but I think the biggest reason why that she's not seeing as much play as she could is just Ice generally has not been great. And Surges is just a very strong card to help push for lethal. And actually, I really like what Surges kind of does. I think that Surges acts as like a very minor check on cards like Une or Zidane, where it's like he's not removing the card. He's not ending the game by doing that. But I do really like the effect of like for one turn I can stop Une from reactivating, or I can stop Zidane from swinging in. I do think that like the ability I would prefer it was just freeze it forward rather than dull one. I think that he makes lethal pushes a little bit too easy. Kind of creates a dead on board situation for everyone who has access to ice and you can only get one forward out. But I think the power level on these cards is about right. We'll go back to wind in a little bit. Earth, I really like that they made sure that Mott was LB1, so that you could at least run 3 Mott and a Shantoto and any Earth deck. I think the Earth is probably the least necessary to have a full limit break deck, just given that you can run Leo with Tyro or anything else. But I do appreciate at least some of the design they went for there. I think these cards came out relatively solid. I do think that Shantoto costing like 6 with a kicker of 3, they clearly didn't want the situation to be you splash a single Earth card, and for the rest of the game your opponent has to worry about Shantoto. Which is probably actually like a better design decision than I think I give them credit for. But I think that having it just be Earth Earth or Earth 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 as opposed to 5 Earth pips would have gone a long way towards kind of making Shantoto a more relevant card. I think it's really frustrating sometimes when you're against an aggro deck and your only out is top decking Earth Earth so you can actually make Shantoto work. The Limit Break 7 is such an insane cost already. Like I said, it's very, very borderline. This card could have taken over the game if it was just 9 CP, remove all forwards and monsters from the game. But I do think they might have erred on the side of caution, which is maybe a safe place to be. Final Fantasy's board wipes are very expensive relative to other card games. I mean, consider that in Magic the Gathering, the going rate for a board wipe is 4 CP, or 4 mana. And Final Fantasy runs on a very similar mana curve in some ways to Magic. And you start realizing that like our board wipes are extremely expensive relative to what they're going for. But Shantoto's a very good card. I mean, heck, Farewell in Magic is 6 mana, which is only 1 mana off what Shantoto's going for, and they're pretty similar effects. Come to think, it would be kind of fun if Shantoto actually removed from the game the Break Zone as well. Lightning obviously came out very, very strong. I think that Cloud is just an all-star in every way. Maybe too good, to be quite honest, but I really like his effect on the format of, again, giving every deck an answer to aggro. And not just an answer as, I'll kill the problematic 2 or 3 cost. But the body size on Cloud is very relevant too. It makes it relatively difficult for your opponent to push lethal through a Cloud. I also really appreciate that Cloud can't hit another Cloud. I think it's actually one of the big issues with Victora is that she kills herself. I think that having the best answer to your own card be your own card is a very scary design space to go, and Victora is borderline in that direction. Cloud not being able to hit himself actually is really good. Lightning probably should have been Limit Break 1. It's a little awkward that if you're in mono Lightning, you have to play a random other off-color LB card because there's no reason to run 3 Clouds, 3 Lightnings, and 3 Leelas, or like 3 of either of these. So you only end up with 7 possible LB cards for Lightning, and Lightning's not an element combination. It's already splashing a lot of other colors anyway. If there's any 2 real outliers, like I said, Cloud is objectively probably an outlier, but I like what he does. It's Wind and Water, and Wind effectively didn't get an LB mechanic this set. And I'm not sure why. I really don't know what they were thinking with these. Ace is like fine, but again, it's mono restricted. And it's very hard to play mono when there's not a reason to. Oftentimes the best thing you can be doing in Wind right now is casting Leo. Or using stuff like Noctis to try to help stabilize and control the game state. And Ace doesn't add anything to that game plan. Sure, you're going to play him and he's good in mono Wind, even with Leo being the kind of focus of mono Wind decks. You cast 2 Leos and an Ace over the course of a game. But they kind of like tacked on an additional effect on him to try to like say, well, no, like, yeah, he's a late game payoff like Mont, but he's so much later game that we're going to give him an extra bonus. It's like, because Ace is the later game payoff, he really probably should, like, they almost should have flipped that. Like, Mont should have had the stick around effect, and Ace should just be stronger on entry than he is. I don't really know that I'd want him to do like 2k per Wind character. Like, that seems absurd that you get to 5 backups and all of a sudden you get to just Genova Synthesis from the Limit Break deck. That seems kind of ridiculous. Maybe like 3,000 plus 1,000 for each Wind character would have really helped make Ace like more generic, but not like so generic that any deck that can splash Wind is playing him. And then, like, that makes the card draw more relevant, because then, like, okay, you have 5 backups, and you now have, like, an 8k cleave off of just your backups. And then now there's a reason to try to keep Ace around. I think that, like, probably is, like, about where they needed to be with him. And Yuri, goodness gracious, what were they thinking with this card? Just a stinker, honestly. Like, clearly, the problem here is obvious, and I've talked about it in the Wind Has a Problem video, talking about that. But Yuri was very clearly hamstrung by the thought process that they can't give Wind any free cards from the Limit Break deck. They needed to have an additional cost. Ace's cost is you have to have developed characters already. Yuri's cost is that you have to run a Chelinka, but the Chelinka options, like, this could have just said card name Chelinka, and I actually think it would have been interesting. Like, I think that the Opus 7 Chelinka Legend is still a really interesting, cool, and fun card. And I think that even, like, well, you could get the backup, and I'm like, if I am in an emergency paying 5 CP for a 4K to play a 3 CP backup with almost no text to the field, you should just let me have that, right? Like, would anybody have complained about that? Or, like, if Wind got, like, a double attacker out of the Limit Break deck, if they have another forward that can attack that turn? I actually think that would be a really cool design direction for the card. You know, support these Chelinkas that, like, are interesting, unique, and powerful cards, but haven't seen play because they're just a little bit under the power curve. And now maybe it's worth running the Garnet in the main deck to enable this with Limit Break. I just don't think that Yuri was that card for that makes it worth doing that, especially not with the Chelinkas that he has access to. Maybe they'll print a really good Chelinka in the future, but, like, the Chelinka has to be a generically good, you can play this at all times card because you need it to be good without casting it off of Yuri. And I just don't know that they're going to do that. Like, how many more Chelinka arts are they really going to have, right? And then we get to Water, where they got the generic finisher payload, and they got the generic everything payload. Leo probably should have said, when Leo leaves the field, draw a card. I think that probably would have been a pretty fair compromise. Then you kind of have a situation where, like, there's incentive to get your Leo off the field, and he's not just a way of, like, free casting and digging for, like, a Wind deck, but, like, still is very, very powerful. I think that the big example that I would give is something like a Bellringer Angel in Shadowverse Evolved. Is this card that, like, comes in, blocks a point of damage, and then when it leaves the field, you get to replace it, right? I think that Leo would have done pretty well in that slot. And then Tidus. I do like that Tidus is generic enough to see play in other decks. I think that, like, giving access to this in Warriors of Light is a really cool card. I think it actually adds a couple interesting, like, skill checks to Rapia control of. Usually you Tidus in, like, main phase. You know, the decision of Tidusing in main phase 1 or main phase 2. I mean, the card is absurdly strong, but there's a cost to doing both of those. If you want to stack your opponent's deck in main phase 2, then you might actually not have enough Warriors of Light to use your Refia spin. Or if you tease the main phase 1, probably the backup you want to spin is something like a Lena, for instance, right? And I actually really kind of like that aspect of the card. I think it's, like, very, very pushed, clearly. One of the strongest cards, but I think it's good. And Leela, I know that Travis is kind of gleefully, like, rubbing his hands in the background with, like, oh, Ghoul said that Leela was going to be a meta-defining card, and I think that this card came out in actually a relatively acceptable spot. I can't believe I'm saying this. I think having a generic card that has access to removal is good. I think the fact that it was dark instead of light was also, like, relatively important to not enable Medine. I'm actually very scared for next set where we have access to, like, constant Medine access out of the Limit Break deck, right? But I think that the fact that she cost 5 is cool. I think that she ends up kind of enabling Arc for Arc decks and kind of giving them an alternate way of reducing the cost of Arc. Is actually, like, again, I really like where Leela came out. She's also, I think that, like, having it as an on-attack trigger as opposed to an entry trigger is cool because it means that every deck has an out to Sid Randall, which is obviously, like, a clearly omnipresent card right now due to how, you know, obscene some of the entry effects in the game are. And giving every deck access to a card that can, in theory, deal with Sid Randall is cool. Doesn't always play out that way. It's very common for her to get dull frozen or, you know, broken or all kinds of stuff that, like, you know, all of a sudden she doesn't kill this thing. But I appreciate what they're going for with this card. And I hate to say this, as someone that was kind of doomer about the format after Kansas City, after Florida, I've really kind of come around on it. And part of that might be that I've played a lot more Refia. And I've kind of stopped trying to make wind work. It's just not going to work. I'd say that, like, obviously wind is still strong. I think that, like, Anthony, for instance, really has shown that wind can have a good place in the metagame currently. But I think that, like, the current heavy control, like, the games are really interesting. They're really grindy. There's a lot of really interesting decision making happening at, like, all times. I think that Refia and Chaos Arc for, like, the top of top tier decks are very high skill. I think there's a lot of interesting decision making that goes into both decks. Chaos Arc, they both have a very low forward count, so there's a lot of time to, kind of come back into a game potentially if things start going wrong. The games end up being very grindy and very interesting, and there's just so many really cool things happening. I came out of Florida, going into Florida, I was like, well, I'm not looking forward to, I'm going to hit Knights a bunch and all this other stuff. And no, it really is a very fun game right now to actually play at high level, which I did not expect to be saying after kind of my feelings in Kansas City. I was very frustrated with, Knights, and I got Rufus rugged and all that. And those cards are still annoying, and I don't think they should be in the game. But I think that LB has gone a long way towards fixing that. And let's just hope this doesn't have the reverse effect. I know that, like, there's a lot of people that are just, like, really unhappy with Limit Break as a mechanic existing, and particularly for Magic heads, I kind of get it. Like, the idea that, like, Companion was such a universally hated mechanic in Magic that anything that kind of has the Companion smell would probably run people off of it. But I think that for a first wave of a mechanic this inherently strong, with maybe 3 outliers in, like, Cloud, Yuri, and Leo, I think the mechanic came out really good. Let's just hope that this is also kind of an outlier. If you want, like, my, like, saving graces on this card, 2-deck format's going to be coming up for Nationals when this card's, like, probably going to be at its most relevant. I really don't like that it ties into EX Burst. I think they're already a mechanic that are kind of responsible for saving the format at the moment, but also very frustrating. And they're frustrating as a mechanic when they're flip the top card of your deck, but when it's flip 5, if you run 20 bursts, this card's very likely to read to, like, double down on whatever it does. But also, a lot of what it doubles down on is not absurd. I think that Thornton is the real outlier here, but, like, add Cucullin and draw a card for 6 CP is, like, obviously better than Leo at that point. But Limit Break 2 is a pretty relevant cost. Hitting something like Lev 6, obviously is really strong, but, like, Lev 6 is still somewhat reactive. Remora is probably the other, like, really big outlier. Like, Thornton and Remora are the cards that probably scare me the most with this. I guess Tyro as well. Like, anything that's, like, a searcher that has multiple good targets, and then adding that searcher to play is pretty crazy. But I think with, like, 2-deck coming up, there's probably, this can only be in one of the decks, which is a very small, like, oh my god, that's the worst silver lining ever. The other thing that I'll note, if you haven't seen the ruling come out about this, is if you trigger an EX Burst effect off of this, it should proc Lena. So we're running into one of the situations where water's best counter is starting to become water, which is a very scary place for the game to end up. Again, I think probably the poster child of you don't want cards that the best answer to other cards is the same card. Zidane comes to mind. Zidane 16. If you're into Pokemon, Mewtwo EX was a card that infamously countered itself. So the metagame became Mewtwo EX plus whatever your secondary engine is. I feel like that we might run into a little bit of that with this, but no, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Limit Breaks and Lunafreya as a card, just in general. I don't know if maybe people want me to do like weekly spoiler recaps as opposed to doing a full set review, if that would be better or whatnot. Just feel free to let me know what you all think, and yeah, see you all in the next one.